This is Ben Davison. Subscribe to Steve Nine.
Right, so the colourful life and career of the Gypsy King Tyson Fury. Currently 32 years old, still undefeated as a professional, the current WBC and Ring Magazine heavyweight champion of the world. Some say lineal. That's an argument to be had another day. He's held every belt that the heavyweight division has to offer. He's even punched himself in the face in a fight. He's been a stand-up comedian. He's performed in WWE. He can't decide if he's English or Irish. He's a singer in the boxing ring. And at times, especially at Christmas, with Robbie Williams. He's an author. He's had many trainers. His Uncle Peter, his Uncle Huey, his dad John, Manny Stewart, Rob McCracken, Ben Davison, Sugar Hill Stewart, and I'm probably missing someone else along the way. There's the farmer allegations. PD Lace Wild Boar much? He's too fast, too fury. He's a Gypsy King. Is he a real Gypsy King? No. He's a two-time Ring Magazine heavyweight champion. He breeds offspring like a rabbit. He's an advocate for mental health. Some say he's a prankster. Others say he's a perpetual liar. His professional boxing cousins are Huey Fury, Hosea Burton, distance with Nathan Gorman and Andy Lee. In fact, the list goes on. Won't surprise me if he's actually related to Attila the Hun, Vlad Dracula and Queen Elizabeth herself. He's still undefeated with a record of 31 wins, 0 defeats and officially 1 draw. Does he pay his trainers a contracted amount only, or is he quite generous? I think we'll leave that one alone. He's a master of ring psychology, mounting his opponents to the point that they break down and actually accuse this man of glove tampering, spike in the water, and all that kind of good stuff. Either way, he's Tyson Fury. Now, before we get into his professional record, where we break down and show you every single fight that Tyson Fury has had, we're going to start off with his amateur background, much like I did with Deontay Wilder and Anthony Joshua. So go check out those two videos as well. And if you are not subscribed right now, you damn well should be. Click that subscribe button. So as an amateur, I think it'd be fair to say that his amateur background is complete polar opposite as to what it is as a professional. But nothing wrong with that. You don't always have to accomplish a lot as an amateur. That's where you learn your craft. Okay. Now, as an amateur, 31 wins and 4 defeats. So he only had 35 amateur fights. Exactly the same as Deontay Wilder. He had 35 amateur fights with 30 wins and 5 defeats. Joshua only had 43 amateur fights, 40 wins and 3 defeats. Dillian Whyte only had 6 amateur fights. Now, the reason why I put a little bit of emphasis on the fact that he didn't have too many amateur fights is because it's true. Because many people who were previously amateurs and went into the professional game, they had well over 100 amateur fights. And one recent case I suppose we could point at, just to show you how few fights that Tyson Fury, Joshua and Wilder and Dillian Whyte really had, was when Daniel Dubois, when he turned professional. Frank Warren said that we have to give him time to progress into the professional ranks. He didn't have much amateur experience, even though he had over 70 amateur fights. So that will tell you in itself, 35 fights for Tyson Fury, not much at all. Now, as an amateur, did he achieve too much? As far as medals and trophies and that are concerned, no, not really. In fact, he only ever won one championship as a senior. Of course, that was in 2008, where he got the gold at super heavyweight for the English National Championships. His other accomplishments, where he won a gold in 2007 for the EU Juniors. He won the silver in 2007 for the European Juniors, that is. And he won the World Juniors. Sorry, no, he didn't. He got a bronze at the World Juniors in 2006. Now, the 4 defeats, of course, the one that really stands out for most people is the David Price fight. David Price beat him on points, 22 points to 8. Off the top of my head, I forget. One of these guys got dropped in that fight. I don't know which one it was. I think it was Tyson Fury. Please correct me if I'm wrong in the comment section. Now, when you're an amateur, of course, people love to go to the Olympics. That's kind of the pinnacle of an amateur. Tyson Fury, he couldn't really decide if he was going to be English or if he was going to be Irish. One day he would represent Ireland, the next day he'd be representing England or Great Britain. Now, in 2008, when the Olympics came around, Tyson Fury, of course, he wanted to represent Great Britain, but they'd already chosen David Price. And the reason that they chose David Price was firstly because he beat Tyson Fury 2 years earlier in 2006, but also because David Price had consistently gone through the GB Olympic setup, the whole amateur system. So when it comes to Tyson Fury, because he's kind of like not hip-hopping, but jumping around, that, one day he's training in Belfast, next day he's training in County Monaghan in the Republic of Ireland, then he's training in Manchester, so he never actually had a structure. So that would be one of the reasons why David Price was, of course, chosen in 2008 to represent Great Britain at the Olympics. Of course, David Price, he ended up getting the bronze medal. Now, Tyson Fury, he did actually ask if he could represent Ireland at the 2008 Olympics, but he was turned down because, firstly, he wasn't born in Ireland and his roots were not strong enough to represent Ireland. So basically, as an amateur, as you can see, quite polar opposite to what it is that he's done as a professional. Now, as far as his professional career is concerned, well, he turned pro in 2008, and this was on the Carl Froch undercard. Now, would it be surprising to some of you that he actually turned pro with Rob McCracken? Rob McCracken, of course, is currently Anthony Joshua's trainer. Of course, he's part of the Olympic amateur system as well, so it would have been Rob McCracken who would have chosen David Price to go to the Olympics instead of Tyson Fury. But quite clearly, he rated Tyson Fury enough to train him in the professionals. Now, as I said, this was on the Carl Froch and Jean Pascal undercard in Nottingham. Mick Hennessy was, of course, Tyson Fury's promoter, I believe manager as well. And it's not for the want of trying, where Tyson Fury tried to get a lot of other people to try and promote him and manage him. Many of them turned him down, such as David Hay. Didn't rate Tyson Fury at all, and quite a few people didn't. So Mick Hennessy, he took a gamble on him, and ultimately, of course, it somewhat paid off for him. Now, as I said, he turned pro in 2008 because he just had enough of the amateur system, and he had his professional debut with Rob McCracken in his corner against Bela Gajangowski. 3 wins and 9 defeats. 2 draws, and he beat Gajangowski in the first round. Now, Gajangowski, he's had a few fights since then, probably about 5 or 6, lost all but one of them. So quite clear journeyman. But again, much like with Deontay Wilder, much like Anthony Joshua, much like all professional fighters, you do have to give them time to transcend into the professional game. So, of course, they're going to be padding out their resume for what is usually on average the first 10 to 15 fights. Of course, Anthony Joshua, he took a huge step up in his 15th fight when he took on Dillian Whyte. Unfortunately for Wilder, which of course is one of the criticisms, is that it took him 30-odd fights, some say even 40 fights, to actually step up. Tyson Fury, of course, it took him quite a few fights as well. But, as I said, he's going to be padding out his resume, okay? So we do have to overlook some of it. Now, his second professional fight was against Marcel Zeller. 21 wins and 3 defeats. Now, since that fight, Marcel Zeller, he's had about 10, 15 fights and lost all but one of them. Either way, Tyson Fury, he stops him in 3 rounds. His third professional fight against Danny Periatkov. Yeah, I killed that name. Anyway, this guy, he didn't turn out for round number 3. He retired at the end of round number 2. Lee Swarby, of course, a journeyman. We don't need to go into his resume too much. 23 wins, 22 losses, and 2 draws at that time. Either way, he also quit at the end of round number 4. Then he moves on to Matthew Ellis. 20 wins and 6 defeats. Stops him in round number 1. So really, that's not a bad opponent. But of course, Ellis, he has had about a dozen fights since, lost pretty much all of them. Then he takes on Scott Belshaw. Scott Belshaw gets stopped in 2 rounds. Belshaw, 10 wins and 1 defeat. So again, on paper, pretty good. But Belshaw, he's had 6 fights since then and lost all of them. Then he takes on Alexanders Selezins. 3 wins and 6 defeats. Stops him in 3 rounds. And since then, he's won 1 fight and lost about 10. Then he takes a huge step up. And this is going to be for the English heavyweight title against John McDermott. Of course, a lot of you, if you haven't seen it, you probably would have heard about it, where most people feel that Tyson Fury got the rub of the green in that fight. Most people, and myself included, if I'm being honest, believe that John McDermott won that fight, but didn't get the decision. Okay, either way, Tyson Fury, he takes a bit of some stick from the press and of course boxing fans saying how John McDermott was robbed and all that kind of stuff. Either way, Tyson Fury, he gets the victory, and he is the English heavyweight champion, but then he vacates the belt just so he can go rematch John McDermott in a bit. But in the meantime, he's going to have a couple of tune-up fights. Takes on Thomas Marzek, 4 wins and 22 defeats. Of course, that's a journeyman. Then he takes on Hans-Jörg Blasko, 9 wins and 3 defeats. In fact, that was Blasko's last professional fight, and he stopped Blasko in round number 1. But Marzek, I forgot to mention, he beat him on points. Then he gets the rematch with John McDermott. Of course, that is for the British heavyweight title, the vacant one, of course, because Tyson Fury vacated it, but now it's back on the line for these two gentlemen. Now, Fury, he even gets a point deducted in round number 7, but John McDermott gets comprehensively beaten up, gets put down in round number 8, and ultimately stopped in round number 9 after getting dropped twice. So Tyson Fury pretty much makes amends for the first fight. And we knew what it meant to Tyson Fury because in the interview afterwards, a very, very emotional Tyson Fury. Very emotional Tyson Fury, because he felt that now he's finally been vindicated, because a lot of people said that he shouldn't have got that victory. And we know Tyson Fury was going through a bit of a dark period at that point where he's actually contemplating giving up boxing because of the amount of flack that he got, which I think is a little bit unfair, because it's not the boxers who make the decision as to what the points go on. It's the judges, it's the referees. Okay, so for me, you shouldn't really blame the fighters. Either way, he gets the official victory over John McDermott in quite emphatic style. Then he takes on 12-0, Rich Power. Rich Power only had about 5 fights after that, but he did actually win a couple of those and lost 1. So Rich Power was actually a pretty good opponent for Tyson Fury. Tyson Fury beat him on points. Then he takes on journeyman, that would be fair to call it, in Zach Page. 21 wins and 32 defeats with 2 draws. Tyson Fury beats him on points. Then he takes on Marcel Decimento, 13-0. Stops him in 5 rounds. Now, Decimento, or Nascimento I should call him, he's had about 20-odd fights since then and lost pretty much all but a couple of them. He really has. But either way, Tyson Fury, he gets another victory. So at this point, he's still undefeated. But of course, he's going to carry on. And he takes on Derek Chisora, arguably his biggest test to date. Derek Chisora, at the time, was being hotly tipped by Frank Warren and many, many others. Of course, he's a Frank Warren fighter. Derek Chisora was 14-0 at the time. And this was for the Commonwealth and the British heavyweight title. Tyson Fury dominates him, beats him on points over 12 rounds. So at this point, people who are maybe not too convinced with Tyson because of his style, his unorthodox style, he looks like a little bit clunky. Of course, he's punched himself in the face and that before. People are going, okay, now he's defeated Derek Chisora. Many people weren't favouring Tyson Fury to win that fight. Now people are starting to take him a little bit serious. But then, of course, he takes on 20 wins, 8 defeats and 1 draw in Nikolai Further. Stops him in 5 rounds. Now, people know who Nikolai Further is. He's been around the block quite a bit. In fact, Nikolai Further, I mean, he only really had a couple of fights since that moment with Tyson Fury, and of course has ultimately retired. But people knew who Further was, and of course he's a very durable opponent, with Tyson Fury getting the stoppage win over him. Then he takes on Nevin Pajek, and this is where he's defending his Commonwealth title. And Tyson Fury gets dropped in this fight for the first time in his career. He hits the canvas in round number 2. But he gets up, pummels him, and stops Pajek in 3 rounds after dropping him twice. So again, at this point, we can say that Tyson Fury, okay, he may not have the best chin in the world, he will get dropped, but he ain't going to let it get to him. He'll get up, and he'll draw some confidence out of it as well, and just beat up his opponent, as of course he's proven through quite a few times. Anyway, then he fights for the BUI Irish National Heavyweight Championship against Martin Rogan. Many people, of course, know Martin Rogan. Now, he was getting on a bit at that time with Martin Rogan. He had 14 wins and 2 defeats. Tyson Fury stops him in 5 rounds. Martin Rogan only had like a couple of fights since then. He won about 2 of them, lost about 3 or 4 of them, something like that. Then he takes on Vinny Maddaloni, and this is for the vacant WBO Intercontinental Heavyweight Championship. Vinny Maddaloni, 35 wins and 7 defeats. So at the time, actually pretty good. In fact, Maddaloni only had about 2 fights after them. I think he won one of them and lost another one or something like that. And Tyson Fury stopped him in 5 rounds. Then he takes on former world title challenger Kevin Johnson. Of course, Kevin Johnson has now turned into a journeyman, but at this point, Kevin Johnson still has some kind of ambition. 28 wins and 2 defeats. With 1 draw, Tyson Fury beats him on points. And this is for the WBC heavyweight title elimination. Then he goes over to America without his uncle Peter in the corner because of Peter's previous conviction. So he's not allowed into the United States of America. Takes on Steve Cunningham, of course, former cruiserweight world champion. 25 wins and 5 defeats. Fury gets dropped in round number 2. So again, he now hits the deck for the second time in his career. Now, I know people criticise because Steve Cunningham is, of course, a cruiserweight, but Steve Cunningham has a decent knockout percentage, not great, probably about 25% knockout ratio, but still, it's heavyweight boxing, former cruiserweight or not. But either way, Tyson Fury gets up, he looked a little bit dazed, continues the fight, ends up stopping Steve Cunningham himself on the ropes in round number 7. Some people say it was an illegal punch where he pulled down the arms of Steve Cunningham and just crossed him straight across the jaw. Either way, Tyson Fury gets the win. Then he takes on Joey Abel. Joey Abel, 29 wins and 7 defeats. Joey Abel, I mean, you can call him a gatekeeper / journeyman if you like. However it is that you want to put it, I don't mind too much. But either way, Tyson Fury stops him in 4 rounds after dropping Abel 4 times in that fight. Then he gets a rematch with Derek Del Boy Chisora, as he is known at this point. And this is for the WBO International Heavyweight title, the European Heavyweight title, and of course the vacant British Heavyweight title after Tyson Fury had previously vacated that belt. And he beats Derek Chisora very, very convincingly, to the point where Derek Chisora does not come out for round number 11. His team pulled the plug on Derek Chisora because there was no way Derek Chisora was going to come back. At this time, Derek Chisora had 20 wins and 4 defeats. Of course, one of those was, of course, to Tyson Fury. The others were to David Haye and Vitaly Klitschko. I forget who the other person is. Either way, Tyson Fury did he not only inflict Derek Chisora's first professional loss, but inflicted his 5th. Then he takes on European level fighter Christian Hammer. Again, this was for the WBO International Heavyweight title. Tyson Fury at this point quite clearly is looking for the WBO route, as it is with like many fighters who fight on Frank Warren shows and that. And of course with McKenzie. McKenzie, of course, was his promoter and manager at the time as well. Christian Hammer, at the time, that was actually a pretty good victory where Christian Hammer does not come out for round number 9. Christian Hammer had 17 wins and 3 defeats at that time. Now, Christian Hammer has actually come back and had quite a few fights since then. So either way, that was a good victory for Tyson Fury. Now, again, it's important to note as well that in and around this time, he was supposed to have taken on David Haye. David Haye, of course, had previously lost to Wladimir Klitschko, bounced back, defeated Derek Chisora and what have you. And Tyson Fury says that he wants David Haye. And believe me when I tell you, if you weren't watching boxing back then, not many people were picking David Haye to get that win with David Haye. David Haye, he had the likes of Deontay Wilder and Marius Wack and Hightower, Richard Towers in his training camp and what have you. As I said, not many people were picking Tyson Fury to get that win. Tyson Fury seemed very, very confident. Of course, he's clowning David Haye at the press conferences and what have you. David Haye ends up pulling out. Is it a legitimate pullout? Of course, he did have surgery in the end. Who knows? Who knows? But then they rescheduled for a rematch, or sorry, not a rematch, but they rescheduled the fight. David Haye then gets a little cut above the eyebrow. Other way around. First time round he pulled out was for a cut, and the second time was over shoulder injury. Did David Haye just bottle it? Very possible. Either way, Tyson Fury, he then tried to get a fight with Alexander Ustinov. They even have the weigh-in and everything, but of course with the passing of his uncle Huey, of course Tyson pulls out of that fight. Now, this is where Tyson Fury pretty much became a household name, not just here in the UK, but across the world, when he dethroned 10-year reigning heavyweight unified champion in Wladimir Klitschko in Dusseldorf, Germany. Of course, this was in November in 2015. Many people will remember prior to the fight, the ring controversy over the mat and all that kind of thing. But again, not many people were picking Tyson Fury to get a victory over Wladimir Klitschko. Wladimir Klitschko was dominating the heavyweight division at that point. Klitschko, of course, he was 39 years old, but still very, very good. Very, very good fighter at that point. Tyson Fury was on a bit of a boxing clinic. Now, it wasn't as wide as many people would try to suggest that it was. The fight was actually a lot closer than what people try to play out. But either way, Tyson Fury gets the victory quite handedly. Shock upset? Absolutely, it was a shock upset. Now, they actually arrange a rematch. Of course, there's a rematch clause. Quite why there's a rematch clause, I'm not too sure, as Tyson Fury was the mandatory. But, of course, a champion has the right to offer a rematch, usually because they offer the opponent a little bit more money for the first fight. You sign a rematch clause, so if something was to happen, then, of course, you get a rematch. Everything was going fine. Tyson Fury, he has the camp. He injures himself in that as well. And, of course, he's making a bit of a spectacle of himself in that at times with some of his quotes in the press. We won't go into those. But Tyson Fury ends up pulling out of the fight altogether after a couple of times of rescheduling the Wladimir Klitschko fight. Tyson Fury ends up getting stripped of the IBF belt as well because he was supposed to have taken on Glazkov. But, of course, due to his rematch clause with Wladimir Klitschko, he couldn't defend against the IBF mandatory in Glazkov, which is why Charles Martin ended up fighting Glazkov and getting that belt. Subsequently, Tyson Fury ended up vacating the WBA, the IBO, and the WBO because they're about to strip him of the belt due to inactivity. And then Tyson Fury, he announces his retirement. Then he's not retired. Then he is retirement. The British Boxing Board of Control, because they're investigating what happened a couple of years back with a PED sample. Now, many people have it confused that Tyson Fury had some kind of PEDs in his system when he fought Wladimir Klitschko. No. This is actually between the Derek Chisora and Christian Hammer fight. And he was out of camp as well, okay? Now, did he have PEDs in his system? Well, he claimed like wild boar, so potentially. But then, of course, when he gets tested again, or the VADA people or the UKAD people turn up to his gym, Tyson Fury kicks him out. When you refuse a test, it goes down as guilty is what it goes down as, which is why Tyson Fury ended up getting somewhat suspended. But it took them like 2.5 years to actually take it to a hearing. While they're doing that, with the British Boxing Board of Control and UKAD deliberately trying to keep Tyson Fury out of the ring, arguably, and that's one of the things I was saying, which is why I got into a little bit of trouble over it. But ultimately, of course, Tyson Fury, he ballooned in so much weight and all kinds of things like that. Mental health, apparently tried to commit harikari, driving his car over a bridge and all that kind of stuff. So Tyson Fury, his career is pretty much over, which is where some of the argument of lineal comes into it. Okay, now, eventually he decides he's going to get himself back on track. He loses a whole bunch of weight. Of course, he's got new trainer Ben Davison in his corner. We won't go into why he left Peter Fury or why Peter Fury kicked him out. But either way, he's got Ben Davison in his corner. A bit of a shock move for quite a few people. But of course, people expect him to take a bit of a tune-up fight next. And Julie, that's what he does. And because of the tune-up, in the fact that he's taken on officially the second best cruiserweight in Albania, in Sefer Seferi, after 2.5 years out of the Ring magazine removed the belt from him. Okay, so either way, he takes on Sefer Seferi, and Sefer Seferi does not come out for round number 5. It was a bit of a comical act, that kind of fight. They're both clowning around inside the ring, and of course before the fight. In fact, the most entertainment was Tyson Fury's fans, for whatever reason, not for the first time, and certainly not for the last time, start kicking off in the arena, start fighting with people. You guys need to grow up, who's ever doing that. Anyway, so he gets to win. He gets his comeback win in Manchester. The return of the Mac. Tyson Fury is back. Okay. And yes, I gave him a pass for fighting Sefer Seferi. I know many people didn't. Much like I gave him a pass for fighting Francesco Pianetta next, even though his record 35 wins and 4 defeats, with 1 draw. Of course, one of those most famously where he lost when he challenged for the World Heavyweight title against Wladimir Klitschko. Now, Francesco Pianetta, we knew, had 0 to no chance against Tyson Fury. Francisco Pianeta was by far washed up, not because he was 39 years old or anything, but just because his ability just wasn't there anymore. And I think most people actually expected Tyson to stop him. But of course, Tyson, he's still not in the best of condition. You can still see that he's carrying a lot of excess fat, loose skin and all that kind of thing. His coordination still isn't quite there because he only had 4 rounds with the second best Albanian in Safer Seferi. So either way, he takes on Francisco Pianeta. This is on the Carl Frampton undercard in Belfast. And of course, they've already announced that he's going to be fighting Deontay Wilder next in the United States of America. Now, there's a little bit of controversy about it because for them to officially announce the fight, all fighters have to be ranked in the top 15 to get a world title shot. Tyson Fury was not ranked in the top 15. Now, I know some people say that, well, he defeated Wladimir Klitschko, so therefore that made him eligible. That had nothing to do with WBC. Klitschko was not WBC champion. But they, of course, duly elevated him quite quickly into the top 15. And, of course, he wasn't enrolled in VADA. Again, so this fight should never have really been announced until Fury was enrolled in VADA. Not suggesting that he was cheating or anything. In fact, I believe that he wasn't. But either way, they do get the fight done after he defeats Pianeta. They have that face-off in the ring with Deontay Wilder. They have the round table after and the press conferences. Everybody's looking forward to it. Not many people are giving Fury too much of a chance because Deontay Wilder is active. Tyson Fury is not. Deontay Wilder, big puncher. Fury, he's been dropped before by Nevin Parjic and Steve Cunningham. He's been hurt in fights and that before. It's only a matter of time before Deontay Wilder lands that big punch. So of course, this fight is happening in Los Angeles, Deontay Wilder's home country, the United States of America. Tyson Fury is still not in the best of condition. He still looks flabby. He's still a little bit uncoordinated. There's still a bit of ring rust on there. We don't know what his energy level is like or anything like that. But he goes in there and absolutely outboxes Deontay Wilder over 12 rounds. Now, Fury, he did get dropped in round number 9. That was a flash knockdown. But in round number 12, he gets landed on fully by Deontay Wilder. Straight on the chin, followed by a left hook. Fury goes down heavy. Not moving for about 2 or 3 seconds. The referee's counting. He comes to. He gets back up. Now, people say it's a slow count. It's not a slow count. It's not a fast count. It's not a 10-second count. Okay, it's a count at the referee's discretion. That's always been the rules and probably always will be. But either way, Fury, he gets to his feet and then puts it on Wilder and wins the rest of the round. Now, I think it's quite obvious that Tyson Fury won that fight. Some Fury haters or Wilder lovers will, of course, disagree with that one. But most people believe Tyson Fury won that fight. You don't lose a fight just by getting dropped in 2 rounds. And again, those 2 rounds, Fury won the rest of the rounds anyway. So officially, they should have been called a draw. They're not automatically 10-8 rounds. Some people have a misconception about that one. But either way, officially, it's scored a draw. They did have a rematch clause, but because it was a draw, that wasn't part of the clause. It's only if one of these guys won, then a rematch would happen. Of course, the Ring Magazine title was on the line for this one as well. Of course, because it was a draw, nobody got that belt. Wilder retained his WBC belt, but of course now both of these guys got a blemish on their resume with a draw each. But as I said, most people feel that Fury won that fight. But rather than go straight into a rematch, Tyson Fury gets a 5-fight deal with Top Rank ESPN for allegedly $100 million. Then he decides that Las Vegas is going to be his home from here on out. He no longer wants to fight in the United Kingdom or anyone else. He's going to be fighting in Las Vegas and Las Vegas alone. And he takes on Tom Schwartz, 24-0. Now, I know a lot of people were criticising Tyson Fury over this one. Personally, I didn't have a problem with it. Tom Schwartz, much like any fighter, firstly, if you're ranked in the top 15 of any sanctioning body and you're undefeated, time to prove your reason for being there in the top 15 and your undefeated record. So I didn't have a problem with that one. I really didn't. And Tyson Fury gets him out of there in 2 rounds. Then he takes on Otto Wallin. Again, a lot of people are critical of that one. Otto Wallin was 20-0. Much like with Tom Schwartz, I said, well, he's an undefeated fighter. He's ranked in the top 15. Why not? Very good fight. Otto Wallin puts it on Tyson Fury. Tyson Fury's face is cut to shreds through legitimate cuts. Punches, not through headbutts or anything illegal. And Fury is even on Bambi legs in the final round as well. So a lot of people can rightfully say that arguably the fight should have been stopped. Had the fight been anywhere else, had the fight with Deontay Wilder, the rematch not pretty much already been announced, and had it not been on a top-ranked show and everything else, that fight probably would have been stopped, and Otto Wallin would have got the win. That's fair to say. But thankfully, for me as a Bret, and of course as a fan of Tyson Fury, they didn't stop the fight. Tyson Fury persevered. He'd done enough to win the fight anyway. It's not like Otto Wallin beat him on points. It's only the argument should the fight have been stopped or not. Thankfully it wasn't. Tyson Fury, he gets the win. Then he goes into the rematch with Deontay Wilder. Of course, this happens in Las Vegas. Deontay Wilder, 42 wins at this time, 0 defeats and officially 1 draw. Should be 42 wins and 1 defeat, but hey, what can you do? Tyson Fury's got new trainer after just leaving Ben Davison with his old trainer's nephew, Manny Stewart, in Sugar Hill Stewart. Sugar Hill Stewart, of course, from the Kronk, teaching him the Kronk style, or at least reaffirming the Kronk style, because, of course, Tyson Fury had been trained under Kronk under the legendary Manny Stewart before. And, of course, he's brought in his distant cousin in Andy Lee and others than that as well. And he beats up Deontay Wilder from the opening bell. Puts it on Wilder. Wilder's in shock. He doesn't know what to do. He's getting bounced around the canvas. He even gets put down with a jab to the stomach. This is how bad Deontay Wilder just took a beating from Tyson Fury. Now, of course, the towel comes in round number 7. And again, I've said it before many times, and I'll say it again. Had the towel not have come in from Mark Breland, Deontay Wilder's trainer, the referee, in that moment, you could see was stepping in to stop the fight anyway. Now, of course, since then, Wilder, of course, he can't take a loss. His own fanatical fan base can't take the loss. They've accused Tyson Fury of glove tampering. They even have to go all the way back to the first fight for floppy gloves. But again, anybody who knows even a little bit about sport, obviously these people are exposing themselves. Tyson Fury wore Everlast MX gloves. Yeah, Everlast, the company that sponsored Deontay Wilder. Tyson Fury wore them gloves, of course, because they're padded with partial horsehair, and they get a little bit moisture on them, obviously because you sweat, they get a little bit distorted. They do flop around a bit. But even though Deontay Wilder said that in the first fight, Fury's punches were like pillows. He's got pillows for fists, and that's why I was able to walk through your punches, all that kind of stuff. But suddenly he loses in the second fight, and the first fight was the reason why he lost the second fight. Unbelievable. Accused him of having egg weights in the gloves, accused his own trainer of spiking his water. So Tyson Fury even poked his finger through the glove and scratched his inner ear. The costume was too heavy, the referee was drunk, the Nevada State Athletic Commission was in on it, and many other things. But either way, Tyson Fury is the WBC heavyweight champion of the world. He dethroned Deontay Wilder, but as I said many times, Wilder was a loss waiting to happen anyway. But Tyson Fury, he gets the victory in emphatic style, one of the most dominant performances from a challenger. Let's have it right, he was a challenger over the champion, Deontay Wilder. Of course, Tyson Fury at this point, not only WBC heavyweight champion, which of course then gives him the final belt. So he's now won every belt that the heavyweight division has to offer, but then again gets the Ring Magazine for the second time, which is one of only a couple of fighters who's ever won the Ring Magazine at heavyweight in their career. So Tyson Fury so far, record 31 wins, 0 defeats and 1 draw. His third fight, we're not going to talk about the whole Anthony Joshua thing and everything, because I just get quite angry about it, because yes, I do blame Tyson Fury for it. But the third fight with Deontay Wilder after the whole arbitration situation and whatever else, we're going to get into it, that's meant to have been for July 24th, but of course now that's been postponed due to Tyson Fury testing positive for COVID. So we have to wait and see what happens with the third fight now on. Anyway, that is Tyson Fury's career. As I said, very colourful career. I think that would be fair to say. Anyway, drop your thoughts below, click thumbs up, subscribe, and my jaw's hurting, and I'll catch you all on the next video.